there's a wound that most men carry, and it's not a wound that it's obvious. It doesn't even look like a wound. It looks like strength. It looks like self-sufficiency. It looks like a man who doesn't need anything from anyone, who doesn't get rattled, who handles things. A man who is fine and is always fine. But underneath all of that, in his body, something else is happening. This is a nervous system that has been running on suppression for so long that suppression became the identity. This video is about that, about what it costs, about who pays it, and about what is possible when a man finally stops confusing control with regulation, because those two things are completely different. Control is holding it down. Regulation is no longer being run by it. And the difference between those two things changes everything. Most men are not strong. They are suppressed, and they have been taught to call suppression a way of being strong all of their lives. And here's how the wound gets made. Think of a little boy. The boy feels everything intensely, the way all children should. He's afraid, he's hurt, he's overwhelmed, he gets sad. And the world around him sends a consistent message every single time. Don't cry. Don't be sensitive. Don't need things. Don't be so soft. Man up. Shake it off. Get over it. And what happens? He learns it. Because children always learn. Because survival requires learning the rules of the environment that you are in. So he learns that emotions are not safe, that vulnerability is weakness, that the feelings he's having are unacceptable. And the only way to be accepted is to make them go away. So he does that. Or at least he tries to do that. He pushes them down, right? He builds an armor. He learns to perform strength so well that eventually he can't tell performance from the person. And he walks into adulthood, into relationships, into fatherhood, into the world. And he does so as a man who has never been taught to have a relationship with his own interior self. And this is where things get interesting. So let's talk about the immediate place where it shows up the most, in a relationship with a woman. Here's a scene that happens constantly. She walks into the room. She wants to talk about something that matters to her, something that she's feeling, something that the relationship needs. And the man, he shuts down. He goes quiet, distant, leaves the room, changes the subject, and he says that he's fine. This is called withdrawal. And the woman on the receiving end, she feels like she's being abandoned, like she's being rejected, like she doesn't matter enough to be heard. But here's what is actually happening in his body. The moment the conversation gets emotionally intense, the moment the feeling becomes the subject, his nervous system reads that as a threat. Not consciously. He isn't thinking, this is dangerous, but his body activates. His heart rate spikes, the system floods with adrenaline and cortisol, and the automatic response that children was wired with is telling him to get out, because this is dangerous. And he does that in one of two ways. Either he removes himself physically, or he removes himself emotionally. He didn't go cold because he doesn't care. His nervous system hit the limit and did what it learned from the past, and that was to disappear. That is not his personality. That is a pattern. Now, on the other end of the spectrum is the explosion, because suppression is not a storage solution. It's a delay of something that's going to happen. Because the man who holds it down, who doesn't process his emotions, who doesn't speak about how he feels, he doesn't move through them. He accumulates all of those things. And at some point, the accumulation exceeds the container and it explodes. Usually what you see is anger about something so small, an irritation that doesn't match the situation, a reaction that is clearly about something else that lands on whatever is closest. She says something ordinary and he responds like he was wrong for years, because he has been, not by her, but by the years of unexpressed things that have been stored within him. The withdrawal and the explosion are the same pattern. Two ends of the same dysregulated system. One routes through avoidance, the other one's through reactivity. Both make her feel unsafe. Both make him feel out of control. And both make the relationship feel unsafe. The withdrawal and the explosion are not opposite. They are the same dysregulated nervous system with two different exits. Now, let's run this same scene, but in a different way. A man who has done the work, who has spent enough time inside of himself to know what his body does when it floods, who has built the capacity to stay in hard conversations without needing to escape or to end the conversation or the relationship for that matter. This is a man that doesn't have to fix what she says. He doesn't need to make her feelings go away. He can sit in the discomfort of her being upset without reading her emotions as an attack. He can say, "I'm hearing you, give me just a second," and actually mean what he says, not as a performance of patience, as an actual pause. As a man whose nervous system has been trained to stay in the fire for long enough to see what is really happening there. And the result of this is that you get a woman that feels seen, that feels understood. And all of that came from the fact that he was present in the conversation, present in the moment that was most needed. Not because he needed to suppress himself, but because he regulated himself. Every child who has a father is reading the father constantly, not in what he says, in what his body does. A child watches how the father responds to stress, how he handles anger, what he does when things go wrong, what he does with his own pain, whether he's actually in the room or if he's somewhere else in his head. And what the child sees, what the child actually absorbs before language, before logic, becomes their template. A kid is looking for what strength is supposed to look like, for what it means to be a man, for what emotions are allowed in his body. And a son with a dysregulated father learns that when you are overwhelmed, shut down or get angry. When things get hard, leave or force your way through. And the kid starts to learn that feelings are weakness, that strength means being unmoved. Love tends to look like distance or occasional presence, and that is what he's learning. He doesn't learn from a lecture. He learns from watching the environment that the father creates with his nervous system. So if you have a son, he's not learning what you're saying that strength is supposed to be. He's watching what your body does when things get hard. And if you have a daughter with a dysregulated father, she learns something completely different. She learns what a man feels like. She learns the distance, the unpredictability, the emotional unavailability that becomes normal. And she carries that template into her relationships. And when she grows old, she seeks for men who are familiar, which mean that they are either distant or close. Or she tries to spend her life getting emotional presence from someone that was never taught that that was allowed. Not because her father was a bad man, because he was running a pattern he inherited from a father who ran it before him, who learned it from a father before that. This is not a personal failing. This is a pattern. And any man who regulates himself ends the pattern. Because the father who regulates doesn't just change the children's childhood. He changes what his daughter believes she deserves and what his son believes he's allowed to feel. Now think about what a regulated father gives to his children. For example, if a child who sees his father move through difficulty without shutting down, he learns difficulty can be moved through. A child who sees his father feeling something and not being destroyed by it, he learns feelings are survivable. A child who experiences a father who is actually present, not performing presence, not physically there while mentally being absent, what he learns is that I'm worth someone's full attention. That's not a small thing. That's a child whose nervous system is calibrated for something other than survival, whose baseline is safety instead of vigilance, whose starting point in life is different because of a man's decision to feel his own experience instead of hiding from it. There's a particular kind of loneliness that women feel with a man who can't be intimate. Not sexual intimacy, the other kind. The kind where two people can actually see each other, where something real gets said, where vulnerability is not a risk but a bridge. This kind of intimacy requires something most men were never given permission to access, and that is their interior. Because a man that can't name what he's feeling, he can't share it. And the man who can't share it is always at some level feeling alone. even when he's in a relationship, even when he's in a marriage, even when he's surrounded by people who love him. He's alone inside of himself because he was taught that going inside was dangerous. He wasn't emotionally unavailable because he didn't care. He was unreachable because he'd never been taught that it was safe to be there. And the woman next to him eventually stops trying to reach for him. Not because she stopped loving him, because repeated experiences of reaching out and getting rejected, hitting a wall, what it does, it teaches her nervous system to stop reaching for it. She goes somewhere else to find her emotional needs. Friends, work, children, anywhere where that person is not. And this is even despite the fact that she chose that person to build a life with. And then what happens is that he senses the distance, but he doesn't have the vocabulary to name it and doesn't have the tools to close it. So he either tries to fix it through action because action is the only language that he knows, or he disconnects even further. And both of them are living with someone who is right there and completely unreachable. Now imagine a different version. A man who has done the work of knowing himself, who can say, I'm not okay right now, who can sit in the conversations without making it a problem to solve, who can receive her feelings, her needs, her truth without threatening his sense of himself. That is not softness. That is the highest form of strength, because it takes far more courage to stay open than to close down. It takes far more discipline to feel than to suppress. And it also takes far more presence to be vulnerable than to be unreachable. Now let's talk about power, because men hold a disproportionate amount of structural power in the world, in business, in institutions, in governments, in decisions that shape what is possible for other people. That's not a political statement. That is the current fact. And when the men holding the power are operating from a dysregulated system, making decisions from a body that is in threat mode, that are currently leading from fear dressed as dominance, and that are confusing control with security. And the consequences are not personal, they are structural. Think about what threat mode leadership would look like in practice. The executive who responds to challenge with punishment instead of curiosity. The manager whose entire team walks on eggshells. The leader who cannot tolerate being wrong because being wrong feels like annihilation. These are not character flaws. These are nervous systems running old programs with extraordinary amount of power attached to them. A dysregulated man in a position of power doesn't just affect himself. He creates the conditions that affect everyone else and puts them in survival mode. And the inverse is equally true as well. A man who is truly regulated leads differently. He's able to hear hard feedback without hearing an attack. He can sit in ambiguity without forcing a premature conclusion. He can acknowledge mistakes without having his identity collapsing. He can build something real instead of defending something fragile. He doesn't need people to be afraid of him to feel respected. He doesn't need dominance to feel safe. He can hold power without being controlled by the need of it. That is a different quality of leadership. A regulated man in a relationship gives people in the room a place to be themselves. A regulated man as a father gives the children permission to feel. A regulated man in a position of influence creates environments where people can think clearly instead of spending their energy managing his emotional state. Now, let's name something directly. The armor that most men are wearing isn't free. There's a cost to suppressing the emotion. It's paid by the relationship that never gets deep enough, in the marriages that end not with a fight, but with a slow drift into roommates. And at some point, every man hits this, but differently. The weight of caring exceeds the benefit of protection. So the question becomes, what are you protecting yourself from that is actually still a threat? And what are you keeping out that would change your life if you let it reach you? So if you're a man watching this is not about becoming soft. This is not about crying in circles. This is not about letting go of everything that makes you who you are. This is about something harder than suppression. Because suppression is easy. Suppression is what you were trained to do. Suppression is the path of least resistance. What is truly hard is actually staying, to have that hard conversation, without completely shutting down or exploding. Staying present with your kid when everything around you wants you to check out. Staying open with the person that you love when being seen feels like standing in the open without any cover. To learn to stay inside of yourself instead of running from what's inside of you. That is the work. Not because it makes it easier to be around you. Not because it makes you a better father. And not because it builds better relationships, although it does. But because the man who does the work, it's no longer at the mercy of his own nervous system. He isn't reacting, he's responding. He's not running the old program, he's running himself. And everything in his life, his relationships, his children, his work, his presence, his community reflects all of that. Not because he fixed everything, because he became someone who didn't need to fix everything. That is the version of strength that actually changes everything. Not the armor, the man that lives underneath the armor.